Hey everyone, I'm back. This is I am Jayada Mercedes, the host of about ADHD and other things. Happy 2025. Happy New Year. I hope everyone's getting a great start to the new year. I cannot believe that we are already in like the third week of January, but here we are. And yeah, today I have a really exciting guest. Um I have here with me Dr. Lyne Piche. She is a registered psychologist, sex therapist, and speaker in British Columbia. She specializes in relationships, sexuality, ADHD, and sex. She recently published ADHD and Sex, a workbook for exploring sexuality and increasing intimacy. You can find her workbook on Amazon, and you can learn more about her on her website, which I'm going to put in my show notes. And so hopefully you guys will get to those show notes and, learn more about her and her amazing work. So I'm very excited to be here and welcome,
Thank
Lyne.
you. Hi. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for all the things that came together to make this happen. So how are you doing? How's your day going?
It's been really good, actually. It's a lovely sunny day today, so I'm very happy and pleased with that. It's great when the weather kind of aligns and I'm able anyway, to take some time and go for some walks and get outside and do some breathing, and it's always fun.
Yeah. I'm recording this on a Saturday, January 18th to be exact. And it's going to be 2 o'clock here in the afternoon. And I know it's still morning for you.
We're still morning. Yeah.
Okay. You're still
Oh,
getting into your day.
it's just
Like
getting started.
first day of the start of your 2 day. Do you do 2 day weekends or do you do 5 day work weeks? How do you do in
Yeah,
Canada?
well, it depends. So generally in Canada, it is like a 5-day work week and a 2-day weekend. I find that with my own work, it really depends. And, the way my brain works, I like to kind of get my work done and then take some time off. So it tends to vary a little bit more, but generally I try to take some of my weekend anyway to
Okay.
do the kind of grounding, personal fun stuff, and then some of it to kind of catch up on paperwork. So try to find
Awesome.
some sort of balance in all that.
Yeah. That's what we're all trying to do is figure out the balance and how to make all of this stuff happen that we are
And
put on this earth to do.
well, and the balance is, I think it's something that we strive for, but I don't think it's something that you get all the time. And so, for me anyway, it's being comfortable with sometimes I get it, sometimes not so much, and it's going to vary a bit. And I like that. So variation is good.
So welcome from New York to British Columbia. So Lyne, you are a sex therapist and you have this workbook. It's very exciting because as I learn more about my ADHD and realize that there's just not a lot of information out there, and that a lot of the information that we're learning today about sex and neurodivergence and all that stuff, it's like, it's new. It's really new. It's like 20 years old, maybe. And still in the last 5 years, I feel like there's just been an explosion of interest in this area.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. There's no doubt that I think COVID helped that. We had an explosion of research anyway, because a lot of researchers, many of us were bored. And so you start like doing all the things that you didn't have time to do before. But there really is, when I'm giving talks and I'm talking about ADHD and sex, most of the research I'm pulling from is the last 2, 3, 4 years max. And so it's kind of cool actually to be talking about things and to have to point that out to people and go, look, like this is 2024 research and this is 2023 research. Like it is new. And the nice thing is a lot of the research is really confirming what many ADHDers or people living with ADHD have said about their sexuality, have said and reported about what they were experiencing. I think the difference is that it's easier to move away from shame when you know that, oh, there's a lot of people who are also struggling with these things, right? Whether it's not being that interested in sex or whether it's being too interested in sex or everywhere in between.
Yeah.
It's nice as a
Oh,
community to get
yeah.
that.
And that we've created the space, that
Yes,
there's the space now exists for people to have these conversations without the shame and all that stuff, right? Because we know
absolutely.
more about our sexuality and how it functions and all the good stuff. So before we dive into all of that good stuff, um, I want to hear from you. What is your ADHD? Everyone has one, the moment when they first learned that this was something that they had, and particularly people who were diagnosed later in life. I was diagnosed later in my life, along with my child. So I'm curious to know if you would share with us, what is your ADHD story?
Sure. So let's me. It feels very complicated, yet very simple all at the same time. I was seeing something on the Attitude Mag the other day of, if you were diagnosed after your child, raise your hand sort of thing. And I just think there's such a big group of us. I have little ones, they're not so little anymore, and they're neurodivergent. So I have a child that has ADHD, a child that is more on the Aspie side with inattentive ADHD. And so as I was getting to know their needs and learning more about this, I've also had a partner and have a partner with ADHD. And so some of those things kind of prompted me to start doing more research and getting to know more about neurodiversity. And it's interesting, I'm an adult. I work with adult clients for the most part, some youth, but mostly adults. And the adult practitioners and the youth practitioners and the child practitioners, we don't really talk to each other. We don't go to the same conferences. We don't
Yeah.
see information for the most part. And so there's really, I think, always been this gap between, the childhood disorders in the mental health book versus what happens to those kids when they grow up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Common denominator
Hmm.
is ADHD.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a reason for all of these practitioners to come into the room now.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the reason has always been there. It's just that we weren't really communicating and it was really kind of this separate thing.
Isolated.
Yeah, very isolated. So as I got to know ADHD and looked at my career, I mean, I've been working for 25 years now in the field of mental health. And so kind of looking at where things weren't lining up and looking back and going, oh, was this adult ADHD? And the more I got to know neurodivergence, the more I realized this is really something that is impacting my work. And to circle back in regards to my own story of diagnosis, I finally just one day was having a conflict, within a relationship with a partner, and I was really frustrated. And I just happened to work in the same building as my family doctor. He knew what I did for a living, and I just stormed downstairs and I said, you know what? I am so tired of this. Like, give me a trial of of an ADHD med. I just want to try it and see if that might be part of why I'm so fired up. And it was interesting because from there, really, I was like, oh, this actually does really make a difference for me. And I went and got diagnosed, and it took a long time to really accept, yes, this is ADHD versus perimenopause and what that looks like. But realistically, I think, at least for me, when I look at my whole life and my struggle points, I've always just worked really, really hard at masking and really, really hard at keeping everything together and doing all the right things. And I'm also in that generation where it was just simply expected, right? There wasn't this option of going, well, this is tough for you and forget it, or, let's understand this more, or what's happening. It was just kind of suck it up, buttercup. And what I'm really thankful for in regards to the younger generation is that you guys have more, I think, space around exploring your mental health, exploring your neurodivergence, right?
I just want to interject and say how this, you have the memes about Generation X and what Generation X people are like versus what millennials are like. I always think that people shoot down the millennials way too much because I think that I love them. They're my favorite because they are the ones that really allowed. We were so wounded. Our generation X was so wounded. We were the walking dead out there, right? And yet they just completely were like, don't count on them. But that's not true. And the millennials were the ones who were told, you got, you're amazing, whatever. And that allowed for this lapse for us to be able to sort of heal what we need to heal and come up. And you use the word mask.
Yeah.
And masking is such an important piece to this because all of us who had to sort of push it down and suck it up, buttercup, right? We forgot, we numbed ourselves to certain things, which exacerbated other things in some way.
Absolutely. And creates so many things in regards to physical health, so many things, even in regards to like easy answers to problems. One of the reasons that I was really like heck bent on finishing this workbook and making it a workbook is so that some of these interventions or ways that you can address your ADHD is so simple,
Yes.
but it has to start with not masking, right? Because as long as you're masking, you're not going to put the things in place that would be helpful. And by putting those things in place, you just make your life so much easier,
Yes.
right?
Right. And it's acceptance.
Yes.
Huge part of this is acceptance. And the acceptance leads to not masking.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
giving
Right?
yourself permission to be who you are and to feel the things that you feel because it is normal.
Can I live
Like,
with my cupboard doors
right.
open in my kitchen?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. I don't have to close those suckers, right? But when you're kind of in this land of, well, your cupboards need to be closed because it's a kitchen, that's what it's supposed to look like. I'm like, I'm taking the screws out of these things. We're not even going to have cupboard doors, right? Why would we need that? Poor object permanence doesn't exist. So no cupboard doors, right? Can I have my launch pad with my stuff ready to go at the front door? Absolutely. Does
Yes.
it look like a house is like
Yeah.
supposed to look like, where everything is tidy and in its place? No, my launch pad exists, but it's great and it works well for me. So why would I struggle? Why would I kind of fight that reality?
Right.
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 So the less that we mask, the more we can figure it out. And the
Mhm.
tools are not necessarily complicated.
Right. And
Right.
that is, your story of being in this field of psychology and then being diagnosed later in life and then coming to understand and sort of see and self-reflect and bring all of those things into play, right? And look at the impact it had on you. Imagine the impact that it has on the average, just all of us, just having that awareness.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the problems when you're working in mental health is there's always this idea that you should have known or you should have known better or you should have noticed. And you're talking about self-reflection, right? And being able to have that ability, that time, but also the information. Many mental health practitioners, we just weren't trained in neurodivergence. We're not trained in neurodivergence. It's really something for the most part that we have to go get separately. And so if you happen to not be working in populations where you feel like it's needed or you're told it's needed, it's not going to happen. And it's one of the reasons why when you're working with a mental health professional or you're out there and you're thinking, okay, I think I have ADHD or there's some pieces to this I don't understand, it's your job as a consumer to ask about that, right? What do you know, health professional, about neurodivergence? Have you got some training in this? What did you train in? We're allowed to ask those questions. And I think that as a community, if we don't start asking and demanding for that level of expertise, we're in trouble
That's correct.
because we don't get the right information. We don't get the right
Advocacy
prevention.
begins with us.
Mhm.
And being
Absolutely.
and being able to walk into that space where, a lot of us are told the doctor, they have the degree, they know everything, that you got to do what they say, type of thing. And it's like, no, 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 no. You
We don't
can,
know everything.
yeah, and allow yourself to advocate and take responsibility and ownership of the conversation and demand that your practitioner be knowledgeable with information from stuff that is as of 5 years, something from 1980. I want to know what you know from the past 5 years, especially as it pertains to the neurodivergence.
And it's a high bar. Everybody is busy. We can't know everything. And I think that's okay. I like talking about this idea of being humble and looking at, the work you can do and the work that falls within what you can do versus the work that does not.
Right.
And that is really important for everybody to be able to do, whether you're a health practitioner or not. This idea of and by health professional, I'm talking about mental health professionals in there, right? For me, it's just this really big umbrella. But just knowing where our scope is an important piece.
Right. So it's a win-win. Everybody gets to learn and grow. I kind of want to talk about when I was doing some research on this topic, and I realized that there really isn't a whole lot of information out there about ADHD and sex or neurodivergency and sex. And what I mean is studies and research, that type of thing. Because I think that there are individuals out here doing their own work in this area. Maybe they don't even realize that that's what they've been doing, but they're doing, and they're helping people. And these conversations it's not like nobody's having these conversations about sex and humans and all that. That piece of it is out there. But as for us, ADDers, we tend to get clumped with this old research that says, the problem is a hyper focus on sex or we need to also benefit from the larger conversation about what it is to be in our bodies and to be present, and what it is to have a healthy sexual relationship with yourself and your partner, right?
So
And and giving us permission to be in those conversations and in those spaces.
Well, I have to laugh because, you're talking about balance, and ADHDers, we're not great with balance, right? Like we're really into something or we're not into something at all. And that really is what it looks like when we think about ADHD and sex. And that's what the research is coming out with. Like, yeah, if we're really into sex, we're really into sex. And this idea of hypersexuality, and there definitely is a moderate correlation between ADHD and hypersexuality, which is this idea of too much sex to the point where it's creating distress. On the other hand, there are people in the ADHD community who are not interested in sex. Their attention is elsewhere. They're hyper focused on something else, and it ain't sex. And so it's not there. And so again, it's this idea of balance, right? And
Right.
figuring out, what does that look like
Yeah.
for you?
I think that's a really good point to make. That there is the spectrum, right? And I think a lot of us are probably in this sort of middle section. We want to have sex. We really do. We're just tired. And, and there's a Netflix movie coming up, a series. And, and I just cleaned the bathroom. It's on the bed. So a lot of us are just like, I think, in this middle sort of range. And just we're not numbing out completely, and we're not over too much of it. In fact, we want our partners to want less of it so that we can whatever and find the balance. So this is where it's at.
Well, and this is a lot about transition. And I have a whole chapter on transition in the workbook because it's super important. Transitions tend to be hard for ADHDers, right? So if you're dry, like right now I'm dry and I'm a little cold. But if I go into a space that is, I don't know, wet and warm, that's going to feel weird. That transition, we're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I really want to feel that way. But then once I'm in that space, I'm not going to want to leave that space because now I've adjusted to that. And it's one of the things that, because we tend to struggle with, it can be hard to get into that sexual headspace. And then it can be hard once you start having sex to get out of it and go back to, as you say, cleaning the bathroom and doing all the things that we need to do in a day. That, I think, is where, as a community, if we talk more about transitions and how we do that and what does that look like, and this is for all the things, right? Whether it's getting into doing the project that you know is due, or finishing your homework, or going, to get the groceries versus sitting on the couch all day. I was laughing and saying earlier, I've got the day in front of me. I can choose to sit down and not move and watch a series of movies, or I can actually get up and do certain tasks. So that can be really tough for us. And talking about how that happens sexually, I think, is a really important part of the conversation.
You brought up the workbook, which leads to one of my questions, which is this workbook for who's your audience? Is it the regular Joe? Is it for the therapist? Like who can get your book? And I said that it's available on Amazon, but who is it for?
Well, it's for everybody. And that was really deliberate. One of the realities that is, I think, not a fun part of our society is that when it comes to knowledge and it comes to mental health, even getting into seeing a practitioner is difficult. There, at least for us in Canada, there's not enough practitioners. And so people are having to wait a long time for help. I wanted to create something that people could use and just take, answer questions, it be interactive. And then, of course, if you are a therapist, if you're a coach, if you're a mental health practitioner, if you're a physical health practitioner, like you can also use this with your clients. There's no problem at all. And it kind of walks you through a bunch of different questions and things. But I wanted to make sure that people could use it.
Yes.
Now, here's my caveat. Okay, so here's the book. Here's my caveat. I got real excited and it's thick. And it's thick because that is how my brain works. I'm like, oh, what about this and what about that? And I have to tell you this and I have to tell you that. Let me give you all the information, right? This business of neurodivergent love languages, right? Info dumping. Here, this book is an info dump. And I'm putting together some ways in which to maybe help people walk through the workbook because I recognize it's way thicker than I thought it was going to be. There's a lot of stuff in there. And just take the pieces that apply to you, right? You don't have to do everything. So yeah, that's my only caveat. Got excited.
What is some of the what are people going to find in there?
Lots of questions around sexuality in regards to what does sex mean to you? What's good sex for you? And that's going to vary. What are some of the struggles that you might have? Whether they be sensory struggles, because that's something we also don't talk a lot about in the ADHD community, how sensitive we can be to sensory textures or temperatures or smells, that touch, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things about interoceptive awareness and grounding. And Jayada, you were talking about this business of connecting with your body. Ironically, that was probably the hardest chapter for me to write because it's tough. It's really tough. Trying to do yoga or any of these mindfulness things where you're supposed to sit still and breathe, that is so hard for me. One of my favorite exercises is this one, just arms up and breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons is it's easy. My hands are up. I'm getting that feedback, physical feedback of what I want my body to do. I don't have to just try to tell my brain to activate something. So everybody just try it right now. Just put your arms up and breathe. So as soon as your arm's up, your body just naturally does what you want it to do, and you don't have to get too involved. Your head doesn't have to get too involved, but your body, you make way for your body to do what it needs to do.
I've never done that. I actually feel that.
Isn't that great?
I do. I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of my favorite ones, right? So, and it's a great example of how a neurodivergent intervention, which I consider that to be, I'm not just telling my brain, do something. I'm activating my body so that my body just automatically knows what to do and I can get out of the way.
That's very
important
because a lot of us, so you know that we talk about ADHD, there's different types, right? You have your inattentive type, you have your combined type, and you have the
hyperactive. Yeah, you got
hyperactive
hyperactive
type.
impulsive. Yeah.
And so, you know, there's implications for different ones depending on what you are, right? But a lot of us tend to or we think that processing everything through our brain is the same as processing it through our whole body. And it's not. And we need to allow our bodies to also experience the benefit of, you know, the thing. So that's why it's not enough to just know it or to tell yourself to do it or that you have to do it.
Nope. Not even close, right? It absolutely is. Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah. And all that grounding is important because in regards to sexuality, if you're going to be in your body. So for example, one of the things that research is telling us is, ADHDers may have more problems or seem to have more problems with premature ejaculation. So ejaculating too fast. And if you're a female, you might have a hard time with reaching orgasm, right? Okay. So research is telling us this. Okay. Well, what might be going on? We're not always real good about sitting in our bodies. That link is weak for many ADHDers. And so when you think about what your body's doing or what you'd like your body to do and connecting to that, if that's a source of weakness, it makes sense to me. And this is just a hypothesis. We don't have any proof as to why these things are happening. But one of the things I think is that if you're not really grounded in your body and you're not there, then your body's going to have a hard time with some of these kind of reflex actions.
It's getting mixed signals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of thinking about it.
We don't do well with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? I'm done. I don't know.
And that's not what you want when you're in that space with
Yeah,
your partner or with yourself or whatever. You know what I mean? You have to be, you're seeking for that alignment. And we're talking about the grounding work that needs to happen in order for us to get there.
exactly. And making those grounding exercises something that is not going to make your teeth grind, make it something that you actually think that you can do and that's easy for your brain to grab hold of. This is the stuff, right?
Right.
And it really boils down to what we were talking about at the very beginning today, which is, if you're not masking and you're able to start articulating, here is where I'm struggling. This is what's hard for me. Then finding solutions and being creative, ADHDers, we're great at that creativity, right?
We're very good at it.
But it starts with knowing exactly what the issue is and being able to articulate that. And because we don't talk about ADHD and how it impacts sexuality, we don't talk about it very often, then it's almost like we don't have the language yet and we're not practiced at saying, this is how my ADHD impacts me when I'm going to get it on, right? But here are the things. And there's nothing to be ashamed of in regards to that. There's nothing that you're doing wrong. It's just a feature of how do you work with your brain?
Yeah. And if you're a person who you don't have ADHD, but your partner does, and this is something you might want to know.
Oh, so
Uh,
important. So thank you for bringing it up. I actually have it in the introduction of the workbook. Like this is also for partners of people with ADHD. Because as a partner, if you don't know this stuff and you sometimes can do so many things to just make it much easier and improve your sex life, just like it's just as easy to do things that maybe get in the way and then start interrupting,
yeah.
right? Some of
Yeah.
the,
Especially if you're frustrated and you're all of that, whatever comes out of that isn't going to help. So understanding your partner more and how this affects them, it's going to help you say, oh, well, okay, make sure it's perfect temperature.
yes.
You said, hey,
I always laugh, but I'm always flabbergasted how some of these very simple things like the bed frame can't squeak, right? If you have a squeaky bed frame, that's really hard. It's super distracting. Squeak, squeak, squeak. No, right? ADHD is going to be like, what the hell's that noise? And you're done.
so they don't getting that. You're down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There's no cuddling after that.
No.
It's like, gotta go get that squeaking fixed or whatever it is. So then you don't get the post-coital stuff. It affects everything.
Exactly. And, many ADHDers are going to then forget that they need to deal with the squeak. And the same time, the next thing is the same thing. So, if you're a partner of an ADHDer, you do want to make sure that some of those things have been addressed because they're really simple and they can make a huge difference in how you're coming together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's showing also that you're listening.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So what do you want people to know about sex and ADHD?
Well, I think just to begin with, I want people to know that it can impact, right? So your ADHD is a part of all of you. It's the whole being of who you are. And so this ADHD impacts all your life, including your sex. So let's start there. And once that kind of makes perfect sense, and I'm hoping people are hearing this and going, well, yeah, of course, right? So now that we have that, then we move along and we go, okay, what are the ways that it impacts your sex life for you? So is it sensory stuff where some of the things are just icky and maybe you need to try a different lube, or maybe you need to not use lube, or maybe you need to do something different to deal with that sensory issue? Is it a transition problem?
So how do we have these conversations with our partners? Right?
Yes. So it's funny. Um, I've been working and talking about sex for over, 25 years, but over 25 years. This has kind of been my area. And many people say this to me, right? Lynn, how am I supposed to talk to my partner about this? And I always kind of scratch my head and I look a little confused and I'm like, but you talk about everything else. Like if you're talking about what school your kids are going to go to, or if you're talking about who's going to clean out the garage or what you're buying for groceries, you would also just be talking about what turns you on and and what sexual needs you have and what you would like, and ask those questions to your partner. But, I also recognize that if you haven't practiced those conversations, it can be really hard.
Mhm.
This is something that does require some practice. Maybe, so I'm working on this educational courses that I want to put together and having things on the ADHDsex.com website to help people with this.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that I can kind of put out there is I'm going to try to kind of write something up that you might be able to go use to do this, right? Whether you're playing with a game or you're using dice or you've got a series of questions, like there are card stacks out there available that you can use to help start the conversation. There's some kind of sex board games you can use too. But at the end of the day, it really starts with carving out some time and maybe giving your partner a heads up if they like to know a little bit what's coming, and say, hey, there's this part of our relationship we haven't talked a lot about. Maybe I feel really uncomfortable talking about it, but I would like to talk about sexuality at some point. Maybe we book a time to do that, whether it's, we order in some food,
Yeah, being
kind of
intentional.
making, yes.
That being intentional about it is important, and that, if you have that if you have a safe relationship with your partner, then there's this, even no matter where you're coming to it from, the benefit of it is, that you give permission for each other to have that conversation with each other and create the space for it,
Yeah.
even if you've never had it before. You can give yourself permission to have it now.
Yeah.
If you didn't do it before. So what if your example was not so what if you're growing up, you didn't have necessarily the healthiest, best examples? You have them, and you can have them with your partner. Yeah. I'm trying to excite people to get
And I know that
intentional
there's a
about it.
lot of fear that it will be a minefield, but I don't find that generally once you get going, it's kind of like everything else, right?
Mhm.
If you are intentional and you start having the conversation, you get excited and you book a time and you talk, generally people really do want to talk about sex. And if they don't, they're probably going to be able to explain to you why this is uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
then everybody's practicing.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was something during your research for this workbook that was a piece of information that you learned that surprised you?
Oh my. I think the thing that surprised me the most was around the sensory stuff, this ick factor business, because I've always associated that, and often we talk about sensory issues as being connected to people with autism or mild autism in the neurodivergent community. And now we have research going, you know what? It really does overlap, and ADHDers have this too. And so talking more about the sensory issues and really exploring the sensory issues, was a lot of fun. I got to try a whole bunch of stuff and, is this lube better than that lube? Or, oh, look, there's these blowjob gels and which one tastes the best? And that year, everybody that, was some of my friends and people who were in my circle, everybody got blowjob gels for Christmas. Like it was like, try these out. Let me know what you think. It was
Maybe your
a lot
friend.
of
I want to get one of those packages.
blowjob. Um, but that was the biggest surprise. And I think it's really changed also how I work, because now it's something that I ask about all the time and routinely. And it's like everything else. The more you talk about it, the more you ask about it, the more you learn that so many people are managing and working through sensory issues.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not even realizing that that's what's going on.
Yeah. They don't
Yeah.
know. They don't
Yeah.
realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
We're all figuring ourselves out. And it's okay wherever you are, in whatever stage you are, where you're supposed to be. And if you're listening to this, then hey, now you've got this other tool you could bring in and have fun with. What is How does your understanding of ADHD inform your work with your clients?
What really has been a game changer in regards to figuring out whether it's kind of relevant. And if it is relevant, you do need to be working. So we're starting to kind of label this idea of the neurodivergent friendly interventions. Neurodivergent friendly couples counseling, for example, is a good example of that, I think, where if you have people who are neurodivergent and you're working through things in couples counseling, it's really important to have that lens as you're doing your work, because it is going to change fairly significantly how you do your work, what's going on in that way. If you're just asking people to, well, just do this, just use an alarm, or just, what would be a good example? Just think differently. I think that's a great example, right? And I think in mental health, we've had a real tendency to say to people, well, if you just thought differently, then all this would go away. And then people who are neurodivergent are like, well, I'm trying, but I don't really control where my head goes a lot of the time. And right now, my head is really interested in this thing over here. So it's not going to just be able to just think about that, right? And how do I then go about setting up reminders and using whiteboards and all of these things that are much more neurodivergent friendly interventions? So yeah, I would think the short answer is it changed everything, but it certainly did change also how I approached couples counseling. And a lot of the questions that I asked also, I think, are slightly different questions.
So have you noticed a different response, like the feedback?
Absolutely. It comes back to this idea of language and having words in which to talk about your experience. So when you're talking with somebody and they're able to ask questions where you can put words like, oh yeah, this thing is icky. I've never really thought about it that way before, but that's really what's happening is it's like, it, and I haven't been able to articulate that, or that's been difficult to even like recognize that this is part of what's going on. Then it's the validation that we all feel when somebody can say, you know, this is really hard, or, you know, this is impacting you. And you're like, well, I always kind of thought there was something, but I didn't have language. I didn't have words. I certainly didn't have validation, right? Because we're moving away from the suck it up buttercup and we're moving towards this place of, can we give you language and words to explore and explain what's happening? And then finding the solution, as we've talked about, can be much simpler, right? How many keys do you have to lose as an ADHDer before you put in electronic key locks?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And if we did it generationally, I bet you it'd be really funny to see, oh, maybe I've lost 30 keys in my
Yeah.
life. And maybe, as we're going down, people are like, oh, well, we don't even bother with keys because that's kind of silly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, this is great. I hope people get the workbook. It's for everybody. It's on Amazon. I have, before we close out, I have two more questions for you. What is something you do to ground yourself?
That's a hard one. The breathing can be super helpful for me, but I like having people in my life who remind me to take that time for myself, who remind me to take a breath, who remind me. And so I'm very much a fan of like the community and building a community of people who I can do that for, and then they can do that for me as well, so that you have that as part of those external supports as part of your
Right.
life. And then I do find that when I transition to things like, I'm not even going to say yoga. Some of you may have seen old, YouTube videos of like, I tried so hard with yoga. I really tried. I just can't do it. It drives me crazy. So now I'm trying Pilates. So we'll see. It can be helpful.
Yeah, give
So
yourself permission.
movement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, intentional movement, I think, is the way to think about a lot of these things. But it can be music, it can be, and I know we're talking about me, but if we open this up a little bit, it can be music or a game or time with friends.
Singing.
Yeah, things where you can transition into it and it doesn't feel painful.
Yeah. And ultimately I like to my stuff for grounding. I have a lot of different things. For me, absolutely 100% getting out in nature. Doesn't matter if I have to open the window, if it's wretched outside, but I have to open the window. I have to hear it. I have to smell the air. I have to stick my head out the window. But every day is an opportunity for me to go out and just notice, the river, the water, the birds. I have to be in nature. I meditate all the time. Sometimes, it's just about, really taking a breath. If I tea, just really smelling it and allowing myself to be present with the tea, or you're eating, right? Like there's all these different ways. Yeah.
It's
Giving ourselves
wonderful that you can
permission.
do that. Yeah, that's a struggle for me, right? Sitting still and like smelling my tea, you're asking for a lot. But I'll keep working on it this year, Giada. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna keep
I love
trying.
all your suggestions, though. And people, that just lots of different ways for people to go and ground,
Yes,
and why, and that's important for lots of
absolutely.
good reasons. And do you want to share a favorite quote?
Oh my. I actually don't have one. And I feel like what comes to mind is it's kind of like music. It so depends on where I'm at and what the context is. I love bell hooks. And so sometimes I will, kind of pick up a book and like read parts of that. There's another author that I really love. And of course, her name is going to escape me right now. But that's generally how I will do it. Like if I'm looking for something that just like that motivation, I'll pick up an old book that I've reread like 50 times and just go to a passage that I like. And it can be really empowering. But for me, it's very context dependent.
Um,
How
I
about
actually
you?
do the same thing.
Yeah. So that's how I do it. But there's some wonderful authors out there and people who have great things to say. And so it's really nice to reconnect
Pick
with.
up a book.
Yeah. Yeah, and just grab a passage. You don't have to read the whole thing, right? Just
Exactly. It'll
yeah.
make sense to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, thank you so much for being on here. I appreciate you. And let's see, where else can people find you? You have some
Um,
media handles that you want to share?
yeah, so everything is connected to so I'm not techie. I'm sorry. I know that I should be and I'm not even going to try. I'm just not techie. There is a Facebook page, ADHD and Sex, and there is an Insta, ADHD Sex Workbook. And the easiest way to connect to those is if you go to ADHDsex.com. Both the links to those, the Insta and the Facebook are there. So you can kind of zip through that way. But yeah, I'm really hoping to kind of continue to build information on the website, have courses, kind of try to bring some content in that might be fun for people to explore. And this is my passion, right? Helping people with sexual health and having good sex has been my hyper focus, my special interest, call it what you like, for, most of my life. And I'm so thankful that I get to do this now at this stage of my career and I get to talk about it and engage with people on the subject. And this is like so fun for me. So I do want to thank everybody for listening and listening to me yabber on about this. And if you do connect with me on those sites, I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation. And it's just so much fun.
It is. It is. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
And
you. Bye, everybody.
all right, bye.